Hello, and welcome to How to Ruin Your Own Reputation. I'm your host, Marcy Warhaft, the resiliency rebel and author of The Good Stripper, a soccer mom's memoir of lies, loss, and lap dances. What do you do when you're a devoted wife and mom until a series of traumatic events, including death, crime, and betrayal, lead you into a secret double life filled with sex and secrets, forcing you to fight your way back before it's too late? Well, if you're me, you write a book and start a podcast. My guests have either found themselves living lives they've never expected or have chosen to reject society's expectations and shake up the status quo so they could feel free to be whoever they damn well want to be. Buckle up. It's going to be a hell of a ride. Welcome to How to Ruin Your Own Reputation, the show where I talk to people who have either experienced things they never expected to or have chosen to live lives either personally or professionally that some people just might not quite understand, and they're doing it unapologetically. One thing I've been learning from doing this show is how important it is for us to share our stories and how equally important it is for us to listen to other people's stories, because the more we listen, the more we learn, which is the perfect segue to talk to my guest today. My guest, Joe Pardavila. He spent years working at the legendary New York City radio station 95.5 LPJ as a audio personality and producer of the Todd and Todd in the Morning Show. He's also studied sketch comedy and improv at the Upright Citizens Brigade, and has been involved in producing, co-directing, and writing an award-winning film, and more. But today, we're going to talk about his new book, Good Listen. In it, he shares different experiences, both good and bad, with talking with different celebrities, some of your favorites, some of your maybe not so favorites. And he uses these experiences to teach us how to be better at conversation, whether it's a job interview or a first date or anything in between. And he does it in a really fun way. I read the book and I really enjoyed it. And there are a few things that jumped out at me that I want to talk about specifically, and we'll get to, but let's just jump right in. So hello, Joe. Welcome to How to Ruin Your Own Reputation.
Hey, Marcy, thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me to ruin my reputation. So I love it.
my pleasure. I'm here for
yes.
you. Okay. As I said, I read it, really enjoyed it. It was not surprisingly it was written in a very conversational style. I felt that you weren't talking at us, you were speaking with us. Yeah. And you offered good advice, but peppering it with some really fun celebrity anecdotes, which was great. The first thing I want to ask you is, you've been doing this for a long time. I'm wondering, and you're on both sides. You've been the interviewer and the interviewee. Mm-hmm. So you've been involved in a lot of different kinds of conversations. So my question is, to write this book, was there something or some things that maybe you saw people like glaringly wrong that people were doing that made you go, okay, I have to write this book because people need guidance? And what made you say it's got to be done and I'm going to do it?
Well, I think this is something that probably a lot of people can relate to, Marcy, is I didn't give myself credit for what I've done in my career. So I kind of just took myself for granted in a way where I had done so much in terrestrial radio in New York, producing a morning show for decades. And I just thought it was just a job I did. And I assumed did it well, that they kept paying me and had me come back every day. So I thought I did it well, and that was it. And I didn't give myself credit for it. It was one of those things where I was like, it was my job. I got paid for it. I did it. And that was it. But then when I started working in podcasting, so in my current position, what I do is I produce and host podcasts with authors who want to host their own podcast. And I realized as I was getting these basically babes in the woods, people who had never been behind a microphone in their life, to host a podcast, I was teaching them all the things that I had learned over my time. And I realized, I was like, oh, wait a minute. So all of that stuff was not just me doing it. It was like stuff that I experienced and grew out of doing those things. And the stuff I was teaching people, I was like, wait a minute. So all of these skills, it turned out there's a thing called soft skills, Marcy. I didn't even know that was a phrase that existed, but I guess that's a thing people talk about. I had all these soft skills that these people could learn from. And so once I realized that I was helping folks like that, I was like, well, if I can help those folks, maybe I could just help anybody who maybe can't afford the services we offer at my company or the services that I provide. That maybe I could just put it in book form and help other people. And that's sort of how it all happened. I just never realized I was never like Marcy. I was never like a book bucket list person. You know how like half the people on the
Yes.
planet all say, I wish I could write a book one day. I was
Yeah.
never one of those people. And so once all of these things started coming out during my work with all these prospective podcast hosts, I was like, maybe there's a book here. It's the old comic question that everyone asks. Like when two comics talk and they're trying to work out an idea, they ask, is this a thing? And so when I went to my powers that be here at the publishing company, I was like, is this a thing? Is this a book? And they're like, yeah, it is. And so I got to work on it. And that's where Good Listen came from.
What do you think is the biggest mistake that people make?
I mean, I don't know if it's a mistake or if it's a human condition. I think people don't care enough. I don't think people care about other people enough to find out more about them. And I think that's what the problem, I think a lot of the problems we have today with this sort of like polarization, whether it's politics or even just beliefs, like everyone's on one side of it and they don't ever want to learn what the other person's thinking. I think we're now, it's so easy for us to silo ourselves in echo chambers where we only watch or read the same content that will affirm our ideas and beliefs, as opposed to just trying to find out what those other people are trying to do or what they're learning and what they're trying to and why they believe certain things. And I give this example of folks that I lived in the New York City area my entire life, moved down to Charleston 2 years ago, and I was living in this new apartment complex. And there was a guy in a big giant red pickup truck that was like imagine like the noisiest truck you can imagine. Like that's how loud it was. But he had all the QAnon symbols all over his vehicle. Like had that acronym. I forgot what it is, like WW, whatever it is that they believe in. So me as a liberal New Yorker would just be like, what is this crackpot? Like he's got like American flags, like giant American flags out the back of his flatbed. He's got QAnon stuff all over the truck. And as a card carrying liberal, I could easily be like your typical New Yorker and be like, look at this nut. What the hell's wrong with him? But then I meet this guy by the pool and he's the nicest guy in the world. Like we have this great conversation. We don't talk about politics. We talk about stuff that's going on in our lives, things we're experiencing, and we got along. But the problem is we don't do this enough. And this is just a really tiny microcosm of what I try to do with the book and talking about people not caring. Like if we were curious about why people thought what they think, I think we'd all be in a better place, but we don't do that enough. We just don't care enough to find out what people are thinking and feeling at certain times.
It's funny because that's exactly why I do this show. It's because I usually am interviewing people who are living lifestyles that people have just written off, have already passed judgment or made assumptions about. Mm-hmm. And I'm even learning because sometimes I'll go into an interview and still think I know more than I do. And then my eyes are open. And I think I always say that the details of our lives and our stories are unique, but there's usually a common thread. There's something that we don't realize. We think we have nothing in common with someone. And then we realize, oh, wait, but there is something that resonates with us. And I think also to your point, when we're so focused on not caring what the other person thinks, we're more focused on getting our point across.
Yeah.
So I think that happens often too. Like you called your book Good Listen, not Good Talk. And I guess that's for a reason, right? Because we're so, I think oftentimes, and you've talked about this in your book, how you're having a conversation with somebody, but they're not listening to what the other person's saying. They're just planning what they're going to say next. So they're not absorbing anything. All they're doing is hearing their point over and over and over again. So it's not really a conversation. It's just two people talking, but nobody's listening or moving forward.
Absolutely. And one of the things, as you probably know, Marcy, there's 1,000 books on there about active listening, passive listening. I didn't want this to come from a scientific point of view. I wanted to come, the reason I used Good Listen as title was I like two-word titles. I thought it was kind of cool, but it also had a double meaning. Like you want to create a good listen and it's good to listen. So it's like, there's multiple layers to the title, but I think what's important about the caring piece is also the curiosity. So if you're not curious what the other person is going to say or wants to say, it's not a conversation. Like at that point, it's basically two people having two different conversations, each saying what they want to say and then move on. Wait till, it's the famous thing is like people who aren't good listeners are just waiting till there's till there's silence so then they could start talking. Okay. They're like, they have all these lines and stuff that's circling in their head while the person's talking. And then once the person stops talking, oh, okay, cool. Now it's my cue to talk. And so if you're not curious what that person is saying, it's really not a conversation. It's just it's two people talking.
Now, do you think sometimes some of it can come from fear and insecurity? Like there's some of us who are really comfortable talking publicly. And then there's other people who it's their biggest nightmare is to have to talk either on a big stage or even just in an intimate, casual conversation. So I would think maybe they pre-plan, like they're so afraid of either saying the wrong thing or not knowing what to say that they kind of pre-plan what they're going to say. But then again, they're not leaving any room for what the other person is going to say. And they're not thinking that maybe they'll say something but it's this fear. So how do you get over that? Because it's a tough thing for some people, and where it's a job interview or a date or whatever it is. Is there anything you can do to kind of build that confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because both of us, obviously, Marcy, we're type A personalities who could pretty much steamroll people during conversation. So we could probably do that easily. But I always argue that introverts could actually be the best at conversations. Why? Because if introverts are not so willing to share, then they should be willing to accept and take in information. So if you're an introverted person, there's no reason you can't have a conversation with somebody. It's just maybe you're not as forthcoming with stuff that's coming out of you, but you can listen to what the other person is saying. And then it's the big listen and react piece. So if you're an introvert and you just don't want to, maybe you don't want to share what's on your mind, or you just don't feel comfortable talking about what's on your mind. The thing about having a conversation with someone, it's listening and reacting. So maybe you don't have information to put out, but the information that they send your way, you're then able to just jibe off that. Like, so after someone said something, I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And again, it's more of the caring and the curious piece. It's like, okay, maybe I don't have anything to add, but I like to know more about what you were just talking about. And so I think that's, don't they always say this in job interviews, let the person who's interviewing do most of the talking? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's basically like in a nutshell, like if you're an introverted person or don't have a big obnoxious personality like we do, Marcy, it's like you want to be able, oh, come on, we wear it with a badge of honor, you know that. So it's I think it's important to just, as long as you are listening and care what that other person's saying, you don't have to be the funniest or smartest person in the world. You just have to show that you care.
Okay, here's another thing I want to know then. So if you're doing an interview with someone, this is going to when you were interviewing celebrities, let's say, have you had, and I'm sure you have, I've had interviews where people are just, maybe you expected them to be more forthcoming or maybe you didn't, but where you've had to, it's almost felt like a one-sided conversation and it couldn't be. Is there a way that you can draw that out of people?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, and this is kind of gets more into the type A field, but like anybody could do this, enthusiasm. I think we are monkeys and we all mirror other human beings all the time. Like when someone yawns, you will inevitably yawn. Right. And so I feel like when it comes to conversations like that, or you're having interviews with people who are maybe not the most open, or maybe they're just slightly more introverted, people feed off enthusiasm. So if you can be enthusiastic about having this conversation with someone, just knowing a lot about that person and feeding into it, that's how you get them to open up. Because once you do that, you sort of open up this channel where the other person who was probably a complete stranger be like, wow, this person's like really excited to talk to me. Then if they're excited to talk to me, I must be interesting. So let me share some stuff. So, and again, and this does not mean being a super funny person, or loud or brash. It's really, if you show enthusiasm, and people can show enthusiasm in so many different ways. Like I said, we're monkeys. So whatever which way you can convey excitement or happiness for having this conversation, people feed off that. And that's what will open them up.
That you just want them to feel like you want to be there.
Yeah.
That you want to hear what they have to say. So can you share a situation where you went into a celebrity interview, maybe either expecting it to go better than it did, or thinking it was going to be more challenging than it ended up being?
Yeah. I mean, I think with celebrities, sometimes we do have a preconceived notion of how they're going to be. And two examples of it that I'll say these people's names and you'll immediately say, oh, that person's a dick. So the two of them are Justin Bieber and Adam Levine. both of them come in with, as you know, big dick energy. Like, like they're known for being cocky, egomaniacal, fill in the blank, whatever you want to say about them. But then you get to know them and talk to them, and it's like the complete opposite. Like when Bieber came in, it was like right after all like the stuff of him like getting into trouble, doing obnoxious things. He comes in and could not be the nicest person on the planet. And Adam Levine was the same way, was super nice. And it was like after he had that his resurgence with The Voice, and Maroon 5 had kind of like dropped out of like the public's consciousness for a little bit. Then he does The Voice, and all of a sudden he records Move Like Jagger, and then all of a sudden Maroon 5 goes on a string of like 20 top 10 hits in a row. And with him, it was more about just trying to get into why he had this change. And so when Adam came in, it was they were just like on fire. And I said to him during this conversation, I'm like, listen, you're killing it right now. But I remember talking to you when Harder to Breathe came out and you were like on top of the world. Why do you think now is the time in your career where you're exploding? Is it because you went on this reality show that no one was expecting much of, and now all of a sudden it's been on for 10 years and 30 seasons? Was you putting sort of like this change of life, like getting yourself out of the studio, getting yourself out of the normal touring rut that people get into? Was it this change? Was this what was the catalyst for what happened? And he goes, absolutely. If I didn't do this show, I wouldn't know what collaboration was like, because he was a rock star in his early 20s. He thought, I got to write every song. I got to produce every song. We put out every song no matter what. And then once he started getting into television, he realized, my God, there's like 1,000 people involved with a TV show. There's writers, there's producers, there's PAs, there's talent, there's all these contestants. And then he realized, I don't have to do all that. I don't have to be the lone songwriter just so I have my name on that credit, or I don't have to be the person who's front facing all the time. It's always this collaboration. And then once he started doing that, he started working with all the best producers. I had rappers from all walks of life like drop in and cut tracks on their album. And it's like, and that change opened up such a world to him. And then, but again, him coming into that, I didn't realize he had changed personally. I just thought, oh, okay, here's this guy who made this smart career move where he went from being a recording artist to being a reality star. And then it ended up making him a bigger recording artist. But I didn't know that going in. I was like, oh man, this is going to be really difficult. And little did I know, it's like he had changed, and he was open to showing that he changed. And it was a really great interview.
So he showed some humility, and he sort of
Absolutely.
explained how he got, like, what the vehicle was to get that humility, which is always interesting too. It wasn't, so you're not thinking, oh, he's just putting on an act so he'll be likable. He was actually explaining where the change came from.
Yeah.
You have a special distinction of pissing off Taylor Swift without dating her.
Yes, absolutely. And she didn't write a song about me, which is the old joke that everyone used to say. But yeah, so, and this is, I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Marcy. It's about creating these spaces where people can share. And so this was right around the time, I think it was after like 1989 came out. So after Shake It Off, where she had just become like this full blown pop star. And a lot of these artists, they come in, and you probably have seen these videos online of like these artists doing radio interviews where they're in the studio, they got their headphones on, and then they send the clips out, and people don't even listen on the radio, but they'll watch the clip online. But so a lot of radio stations do this all the time. But in the early going, a lot of artists wanted more control over their content, and none more than Taylor Swift. So prior to her arriving in the station, we were told by her PR team that we were only allowed to record 5 minutes of the interview for video. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So we're only allowed to put out the 5 best minutes of the interview. That makes total sense. Like, no. Once the interview starts, you have 5 minutes to record that video, and then we stop it. And me being the dick that I am, really had trouble accepting that. I was like, this is stupid. This makes no sense. So the day the interview comes in, she walks in with her entire entourage. The PR person makes a beeline to our videographer, and within a couple feet of me, goes over to him and says, hey, just so you know, at around the 5 minute mark, I'm going to tap you on the shoulder. That's when you stop. And the videographer was aware of this. He's like, okay, fine. And I should have been fine with it. I should have just let it go and just like not said anything else. But I just couldn't control myself. And so I said to the PR person, oh, just a quick question about that. If we get to the 5 minute mark and we have a follow-up question to her last answer, would we be able to keep recording? And the publicist was like, Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Sure. But I didn't stop there. So I was like, okay, so what if we then have a follow-up question to that first follow-up question to the answer that she answered in the first 5 minutes? Would that be okay? And soon the publicist, her head's like spinning. She's like, what is this person saying? And so she's like, yes. And then, of course, me being a big proponent of the power of three, third time I go around, what if we have a follow-up question to the first follow-up question that followed up that second follow-up question from the first 5 minutes? Would we be able to record? The publicist had no answer to this. And then on the other side of the room, I hear Taylor Swift say, well, somebody woke up feeling saucy this morning. And the whole room went quiet. Because I mean, there was like probably like 20 people in this like studio, like pretty large size studio, but 20 people confined in. And just like, it was like a record scratch pin drop moment where like, holy shit. So we get going with the interview. We follow all the parameters with the video, but during the entire interview, she looked at me as if I was like the devil. Like I was about to say something that was going to be offensive or something that was going to be, inappropriate for this conversation. So every time I would ask a question, she would be looking at me so serious and like thinking everything that she was about to say. And then after I was done, she would go back to talking to somebody else, and she was fine. And at that moment, I realized I made it about me. Like this wasn't about like getting 5 minutes of video content. Who cares? But to me, my ego got in the way where I was like, listen, I find this whole thing a sham that we can't do what we normally do with every other artist on the planet. But now we have to change our rules. And I took offense to that, which I shouldn't have, because what I did then was I turned a situation where we probably could have had a great conversation into an uncomfortable one because I let my ego in the way. And I bring up this story in the book and about just creating this environment. I like to say is like, we all have two house guests that we have come over. One is the house guest that will say, hey, can I get something from your fridge? Then there's a second house guest who will go into your fridge and take your last beer without asking. When you're having a conversation or interview, you want the latter. You don't want the person who's going to ask permission for things. You want that person who will feel so comfortable in that room that they will get up and drink your last PBR. That's what you want to create in a conversation. You want that person to be so open, so like chilled, not even have a worry in the mind that them taking your last beer will offend you. That is this type of situation that you want to create every time, whether it's doing an interview, whether it's having a conversation with somebody, whether it's doing something at work. It's all about creating that safe space for people to share ideas and communicate with each other.
Now, you said before the whole monkeying thing and how we monkey each other and how you can pull someone out of maybe a lower energy by bringing bigger energy. So let me ask you this. Clearly, we don't know whatever energy she walked in the room with. You probably, I don't know.
Yeah.
But whatever it was that you walked in with, guaranteed it had dropped when this whole thing started. Now, what I want to know is, from your perspective, when that happened, was your reaction to then try to up your energy to bring her back, or did her energy affect you? And were you maybe rethinking some of the questions you were going to ask? Like, that's what I'm curious about. Did it change the whole dynamic for you too?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, totally. I just was incredibly careful with everything I was going to say and not being my true self. I was all of a sudden now someone who is going to be on guard. Whereas with a conversation, you want these free flowing words and, you don't have to worry about offending someone or anything like that. And so I just got so into my own head that I was just like, I sure probably was still enthusiastic, but I was still so much in my own head that I couldn't be my true self. And so, yeah, I mean, it has this effect in multiple different levels. Not only does it put off the other person, but then all of a sudden now you're in your own head thinking, oh my God, it's like, when you have a regret, then that regret's sitting in your brain. So instead of you thinking about what you're going to talk about next or what the other person's saying, you're just thinking like,
you're just replaying it.
I really shit the bed on that one. So, but yeah, it happens.
Now you're clearly a little cocky and confident and, self-assured. Don't even look at me like that. You know that.
What?
So I know. I'm sorry if I'm the first person to tell you that. But my question is, has there ever been, I'm sure there had to be somebody that you were very nervous going into an interview. Is there somebody that you were like, I don't know if I can do it?
Here's a funny story. So I was never intimidated by any like entertainment personality, like you name it. Like I've interviewed Tom Hanks and George Clooney on the red carpet. I mean, I've interviewed like the biggest stars you could think of. When I got really worried was when I went from working in entertainment to business. And so when I started interviewing like entrepreneurs and CEOs, people who run companies, when I first started doing it, I was like, what am I going to say to these people? These people are all like college educated. They have MBAs. They run companies that are worth several $1 million. What the hell am I going to say to these people? And, you know, it's the old, I'm sure you've heard the phrase like the imposter syndrome. Like, I'm just going to come across as an idiot. I'm not going to know what to say to these people. And what I realized early on, and this could happen to pretty much anyone, that when you're going from one type of, you know, they call it transferable skills, like you transferring skills, like I didn't know if my skills were transferable. And then I realized once I started speaking to these entrepreneurs and CEOs that they're all the same. They're all people. They all love to talk about themselves. They all love to be able to be on stage and present themselves in the best possible manner. And that's when I realized, I'm like, it's all the same. It doesn't matter if they've got an album coming out or they have a company worth $50 million. They're just people who want to talk about the stuff that's going on in their life. So when it comes to nerves, no, when it came to celebrities, but when it came to like speaking to people that were out of my lane, I'm uncomfortable because I'm like, I'm going to come across as an idiot. I'm this college dropout, undereducated, don't know much, but I just know enough. And I was really worried about it. And it turned out that it's all the same. They're just people.
And you get to learn something new, right? Because you have to do a little bit of research, and then also just listening, you're going to learn. And then you build up your confidence. This is why people shouldn't avoid meeting people that they don't feel qualified to, because it just builds up your repertoire of knowledge so that opens more doors.
Yeah. I mean, that research piece is big though, Marcy. I want to say that research piece is big because one of the things I realized from talking to celebrities and then talking to business leaders is you still got to do your homework. So all the homework that I was doing, whether it was prepping for like a Katy Perry interview or interviewing someone, you know, the fifth lead from like Modern Family, you have to research and care about what these people are doing. And then if you can do that in any kind of walk of life, whether it comes to, you know, people who come and work and just showing the least bit that you care enough that you look them up and found out something that they did, that's a huge thing. And that was completely transferable. So the research I was doing, prepping for an interview with a singer was the same as going to be as a CEO. The outlets will be different, you know, whereas the singer, I'll probably be getting information from, you know, from an entertainment site like a TMZ, and the business leader I'm probably getting from Bloomberg or Forbes. It's all the same. It's just people want to talk. They all have stuff they have in their background that's fascinating that you can discuss. And it's all that research speech is very big. And you did it with me. You read my book. You didn't just put me on your podcast.
No, just wait.
You read it. You probably Googled me, see what else was going on in my life. I'm sure you did.
Come up. Of course. I have a couple of things. Actually, one of the things I'll bring up is you mentioned that magic moments. So explain what that is, and then I'm going to tell you how something really jumped out at me.
Okay, cool. Ahead. Yeah. So I'm a big movie fan. And I remember reading this article. I read this article, I want to say nearly 20 years ago. And do you ever use that app Pocket that like you can save links to store? So there's this app called Pocket where basically you can copy a link and it'll stay in this folder. So if you want to read it like a day from now, a week from now, months from now, you can just go back to it. So I'd added this article from one of the Hollywood trades, and it was basically a column by William Goldman, who wrote like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and like pretty much any great film that came out in the 70s, he's like responsible for. And he had written about magic moments, and he talked about like when you're creating any kind of film or anything artistic, you want to have these magic moments where people like for forever time will remember that one thing. And he didn't know anything about it until one time he wrote this Paul Newman movie called Harper. And it's like this, it's kind of like your typical 70s, you know, detective, like anti-hero kind of character. And he'd written it. It was going to be a great film. And all of a sudden, after the film came out, everyone wanted to talk about the coffee scene. And he's like, and people were like, oh my God, William, great day. I love the thing with the coffee. And he wrote the film. He wrote every word of the film. He didn't know what people were talking about. And he goes back and he says, oh, yeah, in the opening credits of the film, they needed filler to run over the credits. They wanted to show kind of like how gritty a character he is. So Paul Newman wakes up and he has no coffee grounds to make any coffee. So he goes into his garbage can and takes days old grounds, rinses them out and puts them back in the coffee and drinks that coffee and makes this face where it's like, oh God, this tastes horrible, and just keeps drinking it. From that magic moment, people were sold on Paul Newman's character as like, I love that guy. He's just like me. He's going his coffee, grabbing the day old grounds, drinking it up, and just living his best life. And so he talks about like, and so William Goldman said in this piece, creating these magic moments is what's art's all about. And I transferred that into having conversations, like finding those little magic moments that you could pull. And then those are the ones that go viral, people talk about, because people may say, hey, that was a cool podcast, but not like, do you remember anything about that podcast? No. Or do you remember anything about that show? No. But you remember these magic moments that like outlive the show or that interview. And so you can do that by doing all the stuff we've been discussing in this podcast, Marcy. And it's like caring, listening, doing research. When you have all of those tools in your toolkit, that's when magic moments happen. And they can happen at moments you don't think, like you can't stage a magic moment. They just happen. And a handful of times in my career, they happen because of all the things we've been talking about. And we all want them, but you can't force it. But the more and more you do podcasts, the more and more you interact with people, they're going to happen if you do all the things we've been talking about.
Well, it was so funny because you mentioned a few specific ones also, aside from that one. And okay, this is what I thought was, for me, I don't know, it kind of blew me away. So one of the things you mentioned, and it was something that happened in 1995. So we're talking about over 25 years ago. And you had mentioned it was the thing that had happened after Hugh Grant had been caught in an indiscretion after attempting to, I think, cheat on Elizabeth Hurley. Yeah. And he got caught. And then he was on, I guess the first interview he did after that was with Jay Leno. And okay, here's why it blew me away that you mentioned it, because two reasons. One, that is something, that moment between them that moment between them was something, for some reason, over 25 years later, I will always remember. It's one of those things for me that I'm like, I don't know, it really, really stuck with me. So the fact that you wrote that, this person, I don't know, to me, that was a crazy, because I thought it stuck with me for some reason. And the fact that you mentioned it, that was the first thing that I thought, that's crazy. It really did prove your point that I didn't even realize was a magic moment. I thought it was a magic Marcy moment, like that it just affected me. But then the other thing, so here's the other thing. What I found so interesting about it was you were talking about it from the Jay Leno perspective. Like it was a great moment for Jay. And I was researching it again. And that was how it was written up. There were articles. There was one article that said, Jay made leaps on the back of Hugh Grant. Like it was all about that. But for me, the reason why I remember it, it was a Hugh Grant moment. Like for me, it was what endeared him to me, because I saw it as he had messed up. He went on the show. Jay Leno said, "What were you thinking?" Which is like that big thing that you hear. But to me, Hugh Grant could have taken it so many ways. And he even said that his publicity people and people were saying, just say it's your childhood. Just say that you were stressed. They gave him all these outs. But his answer was, listen, there are good things. You know what are good things and you know what are bad things. And he said, and I did a very bad thing. And I loved that. Like to me, him owning that was the moment. So I guess it really stood out to me when I read that in your book, because it was oh my God, it was a moment that I shared with a ton of people that I didn't know. But it was that, to me, it's almost like a double magic moment, because you get it from two different perspectives and you don't even know like which side it's impacting. And I thought that was really interesting. And to think it was that many years ago.
And on multiple levels, that was such a huge moment for both of them, because people may not remember this, but at the time, from the Jay Leno perspective, he was a distant second to David Letterman, because Letterman had just went over to CBS to do his own late night, and he was killing it. Like people were like, "Oh, Jay Leno Tonight Show." That's what like grandparents watch. Like that's like people used to watch Johnny Carson, now watch Jay Leno. So it's like people in their 70s are falling asleep watching it. And Letterman was the hip cool guy doing like stunts in New York City, and this moment happened. And from that episode forward, Jay Leno never relinquished first place. He was first place after that episode for the rest of his run.
Really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah. For the I mean, he literally like And then of course things happened like the OJ trial he took advantage of, and that was a big part of the thing. But from that point forward, it completely changed the narrative. And I know people still aren't big fans of Jay Leno's comedy and brand of comedy, but say what you will, the guy was number one longer than anybody who's ever been around. And from the Hugh Grant perspective, it was important because remember, in the 90s, one sex scandal would destroy careers. You had one little indiscretion, you were finished. But the way he handled it, like you mentioned on Tonight Show, and moments after that, he owned up to it, didn't make excuses, and just went on. Luckily, he's a white male. I mean, we can get into all the geopolitical parts of it, but still, white guys who got into sex scandals back then would also get pretty much canceled before canceling was a thing. Mm-hmm. And so the way he handled it was, he obviously took some hits, but that movie he was promoting at the time turned out to be a bigger hit than it was supposed to be. It was like this really cheap. It was like, you don't probably remember this. It was a romantic comedy called 9 Months. And it was about,
I remember it.
Yeah. It was this lifelong bachelor who finally got married and he's having his first kid. So it's all like this very, very basic rom-com scenario where it's this guy trying to grapple with the fact that he's going to be a father. Very simple premise, but because of the scandal, the way he handled it on Leno's show, the movie became this enormous hit and he became like an A-list movie star all because of that. And it just goes to show you, like, these magic moments, like you said, it's not this one way. It's not one thing that's happening to a person. It's a lot of people are affected, and it affects us, the people who watched it or seeing it now. Like, wow,
for sure,
that's amazing. That's a magic. We all want that, and Jay got that, and it pretty much changed the course of his history.
It's funny though when you say that now, like, I didn't realize with the movie that came after, it could have really been bad, because if here he was caught cheating on, and everybody knew that they were one of those couples that you just knew them together.
Absolutely.
And here, if he's cheating or trying to cheat, and then he's doing a rom-com, that could be a very hard sell. That could be a very hard sell. So the fact, and now when I think about it, now I'm thinking, was I manipulated? Because I'm thinking it was very much in his character, though. He is this kind of sheepish, kind of boyish, kind of like, aw, shuck. So now I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe that was all part of it.
Yeah, he's a good actor.
Maybe that's part of now I'm rethinking everything. Jeez. You said something else just now. I'm trying to, the whole cancel culture thing. Okay. All right. I have another question for you. You had referenced, so you referenced the common quote of dance like nobody's watching, which I disagree with. I say dance like everybody's watching, but that's just me. Yeah. But dance like nobody's watching. But then you said, but talk like everybody's listening.
Yeah.
So, and the idea with that was there were a few things, right? There was, one of the things is, yes, we have the right to say whatever we want to say, but to understand that people are going to hear it and they have a right to respond in the way that they're going to respond, right? So I have a question for you. So years ago, when you were on Dish Nation,
yes,
there was a time when you were very free-flowing with your commentary. And there was one particular show that I watched where you had brought up, you made some comments about Kid Rock, funny and on point. And also you had a bit of a little mini Twitter war with Kirstie Alley.
Yes.
Also funny and on point. But my question is, would you be this was like 9 years ago that I found this.
Yeah.
See, I did my research.
I see
now, that. Yeah. So would you be as free-flowing with your comments now as you were back then? Or would you worry about repercussions?
I mean, that's a very nuanced question. I think, a very nuanced answer too. I think it's important to say when you're being free flowing, there's one thing about being free flowing and being offensive. So I think the things I said on Dish Nation, I think I was making fun of like John Travolta and Kirstie Alley got annoyed at me. I think this is a comedy anecdote. As long as you're not punching down, anything is free game.
Yeah.
So I think Mel Brooks said it famously, like, there's nothing funny about making people that are lesser than you or have difficulties or something like that. It's only funny when you're punching up. That's why every talk show is a political talk show making fun of a president, fill in the blank, making fun of Mark Zuckerberg. It's always funnier when you're punching up. So my big thing is, as long as I'm not punching down, I feel like I can say anything I want about celebrities. Like, regular people know. But I think that's super important for people to keep in mind. Like, I always, it drives me crazy when people make fun of, like, or not even make fun of, but like have negative comments to say about, whether it's the LGBTQ community, whether it's minorities or something like that, because you're punching down. Like it's not cool. Like you're not going to gain anything you're not going to raise yourself by pushing other people down. So as long as you're not worried about any repercussions from, like, for example, like you could say something nasty about a celebrity, and then if you have a job that celebrity is connected with, you could probably lose your job. There is things to that. But as long as you're not punching down, I think anything is fair game. And as long as you're respectful in a way where if you're punching up, it's not like punching up in a really gross manner. I think that's what comedians are built on. Like the best comedians are making fun of themselves or making fun of higher status people. The ones who are doing like the making fun of whether it's minorities or the LGBTQ community, they may be popular in those fringes of people who like nasty and hateful people. That's not my bag, but I get it. People like that stuff and they don't mind it, but that's just not me. And I think that's most of the country doesn't want that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's another comedian, I wish I can remember what his name is. He's from the UK, but he made a comment about that too, about how he has no respect for comedians that really punch down, because it's like, oh, you're going for people who, what, you think they already have it tough. So why are you like, what? Oh, they've been riding the wave of, being a minority for so long. Like, why? There's nothing. It doesn't show, and it doesn't show a wit or a comedic intelligence. I'm curious, has Michael Bolton forgiven you?
Oh, well, yeah. That was a funny story. Yeah. So this wasn't me. This is the host I was working with, but Michael Bolton.
But you were there.
Yeah, I was there. So that Michael Bolton, the famous singer, and for some time, people don't believe this. Like he was one of the biggest stars on the planet. Like he was huge. But before the internet, when you were on radio or television, you pretty much said whatever you wanted about celebrities, and no one would ever hear, unless it was something really great. No one would ever hear a thing. So we had this running joke on our show that Michael Bolton started to look like Gallagher, because now Michael Bolton now shaves his head pretty tight, so he's got really tight do. But back then he had long flowing locks, but they started in like the back of his head. It was really kind of off-putting. And so we had this running joke that he looked like Gallagher, the comedian who had the same look, had the hair starting from the back of his head down. And it was just, we thought it was just funny. And it turns out he didn't think it was funny because he found out about it. And he showed up one day when we were doing a private concert for our listeners. And he goes, all right, I'm here, but I'm not going on until you guys apologize for saying what you were saying.
Wow. Yeah.
And as a whole, a team were like, well, we got like hundreds of people waiting for this concert. Like, how would it help us if we decided to be so manly about it and be like, oh, we're not apologizing. If he can't take a joke, it's not our responsibility. But we had to suck it up and apologize. He went on, did his show for people. He ended up having many difficulties in his career because he had trouble maintaining his stardom, because after a while people were like, it's just like this guy sort of just singing the same songs over and over again. But now you fast forward to now, there's receipts. When you say something, someone's going to find it, whether it's a tweet, a blog, a video post, it's out there for everyone to see. And that's why I say to people, say what you want, but remember, other people, like you said, they could say what they want to, and they can react accordingly with their pocketbook. I'm not a big fan of boycotts. I always feel like boycotts only usually hurt like the little people. Like you have people be like, I'm never going to go to X store because their CEO said this. I'm like, well, just so you know, if you don't go to that store, it's probably not going to affect the CEO, but it's probably going to affect the worker who works for that CEO. And then they'll have layoffs and then they'll lose it. So I'm never a big fan of boycotting, but that's how people can respond in kind by not giving any money or viewership to a particular person. That's the way I've always handled things. If someone says, like, for example, like Papa John's, remember the Papa John's CEO had said some really inappropriate things on a conference call with investors. And after that, I was like, I'm not going to make a big stink about it. This is the first time I'm actually even saying this public. I'm like, I'm not going to make a big stink about it. I'm not going to tweet about it. I'm not going to say anything on the radio about it, but I just won't order Papa John's pizza anymore. And that was my own little, if you want to call it a boycott, but that's just the way I handled it. If someone is saying something offensive on a radio or television show, I won't listen to that. I won't tell other people that, but that's just, and I think that's how most people do. Most people aren't going to sign some sort of, what's that website where you could start a petition? Like most people aren't going to sign a petition or start a petition, but they will
change.org.
Change.org. Yeah, they'll do it in their own way, like I did.
It's so funny because as we're talking, all I'm thinking of is, I wonder what Gallagher was thinking.
Oh
Like
yeah,
maybe he
that's
was the
true.
one that was most upset. Nobody even thought to check on Gallagher.
No, but then again, he's a comedian, so maybe he probably had a better sense of humor of it than Michael
Yeah,
Bolton,
that's
who's
true.
a quote unquote pop star. Who knows?
So I was just thinking also, I asked you earlier when you were interviewing somebody, if they were hard to get some information out of, how you put that out. So I'm just curious, have you ever been on the other side of it when somebody was interviewing you, but you saw them struggling? Like you were, you wanted to almost go and switch places or give them some questions, or have you ever had that? And how do you respond to that if you were in a conversation with somebody and maybe they're supposed to be in the lead, but they're flailing?
Yeah.
How do you save that?
I think the mindsets are, you just flip the mindset like you would be if you were the guest, if you were the host, like be empathetic, like really understand that, man, this person or woman is not having the best day. So just do the best you can. I think that the empathy piece, I know we keep circling back to it, but like the empathy piece, as long as you are empathetic to the other person, whether it's a difficult interview or not, I think that's the only thing you can really do. There's really nothing you can, I mean, you could do more of the heavy lifting, like instead of letting them ask so many questions, maybe you go on a little longer than you normally would, but that's only because you care. Like you're like, oh shoot,
Right.
okay, this is not going well. So let me go ahead and just run with the ball, and I'll make them stop me from talking. So I think as long as you're empathetic to that person who's having difficulty and you're willing to just sort of carry the load, I think that's how you kind of remedy those situations.
Okay. Have you ever had a celebrity apologize to you because maybe they felt that because you just said maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they're going through something. Have you ever had an experience and then they ended up, coming back to you and saying, oh, it wasn't it was an off moment that you caught me?
Yeah, I don't think a celebrity's ever apologized. I've had like their people, quote unquote people, say, hey, by the way, sorry, they weren't on their best behavior or something like that. And because most, as you know, PR people, they're used to getting it from both sides, from their client and from the content company. So it's several times I'll have that where like, hey, sorry, they woke up on the wrong side of the bed kind of thing. But you'll never it's very rare for a celebrity to apologize for something like that, because to them it's like a dime a dozen. I'm like one of 1,000 interviews they did, and if it didn't go well, it is what it is. They don't care. Right. But yeah, no, you'll get like the intermediary like pop in and say something, but never directly from a celebrity.
No, I know that you said also in your book that you had an issue with Jennifer Aniston's bodyguard, but that she was kind.
Oh my God, yeah, that was a great story, and this one actually got picked up by Page Six, which is funny because when I was writing the book, I was like, man, some of these stories, like the Taylor Swift story, they'll be like juicy stories for entertainment like outlets. And come to find out, there's this shift where now all of a sudden entertainment media companies, they don't want bad stories anymore. They want good interactions with celebrities, which was, I was like, to me, it was like weird because I had come from the other side of like, you know, I was living through the days of like the Britney Spears and Michael Jackson scandals that were going on. And you were always like hammering on these celebrities for screwing up. And now all of a sudden we're in this world, which, trust me, this is awesome that this is happening. But I was just really 100%. Like genuinely surprised. Like, oh, wow, people want to know good interactions, not bad interactions. That's so weird. I'm not used to that. So I was happy that was like the one story in the book that got the most press. Was I'd been assigned to try to track her down at her. She was filming in the middle of Midtown Manhattan on this empty street. Basically had almost like, I want to say like just like a tiny trailer, like on 33rd Street in Manhattan. No one was around. And they said, hey, go down and interview Jennifer Aniston. I'm like, yeah, sure. Whatever. I'll go to interview her. So I go down, not a soul around, but a bodyguard. So I go try to knock on the door. I go towards the trailer, and the guy, big, large bodyguard, goes, what do you think you're doing? I'm like, oh, I'm just, I'm from the radio station. I'm giving like the call letters. I'm from WPLJ. And, we just want to say how Jennifer's doing. We want to congratulate her for Friends and the new movie. He's like, no, you're not. I'm like, no, but it's okay. It's okay. So this is always my defense when I was like younger. I was like, I just be really like, no, it's okay. It's no big deal. And the guy was like, no, man, no. So I walk away. I call up to the radio station. I'm like, hey, listen, they're not having it. And he goes, oh yeah, try again. I'm like, okay. So I go back and he goes, where do you think you're going? Oh yeah, I was stupid. I was young and stupid. And the guy's like, where do you think you're going? Oh yeah. And again, do the whole thing. I'm from WPLJ. I'm just trying to interview Jennifer Aniston. And he's like, no, you're not. And meanwhile, Jennifer Aniston is hearing this commotion from inside her trailer. So she opens the door, pokes her head out. She goes, hey, is everything okay up there? And then I do my whole, hey, Jennifer, I'm and she's like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm about to go shoot in a little while. I really don't do interviews at this time, kind of thing. I'm like, all right, cool. So I go back up to the radio station table between my legs, and I'm like, hey, sorry, guys, couldn't get Jennifer Aniston. And then we get a call from our receptionist, and the receptionist didn't know any of this was going on. So she calls and goes, there's someone who says they represent Jennifer Aniston on the phone, and they want to talk to you guys. I'm like, can we put them through? I'm like, yeah, put them through. And so Jennifer Aniston calls up the radio station and has like this 30-minute interview off the cuff because she wanted to apologize for the way that the bodyguard was treating me. And we have this great chat. I mean, she was so kind. She was talking about, because this is like height of Friends. This is like, cast of Friends on the cover of Rolling Stone. She just booked her first leading film. And she was just like really cool, open and honest. And it was all because she wanted to apologize because the bodyguard was being a dick to me. And I never forgot that. It's funny. That happened so long ago. And it's so funny that people like love that story so much. I'd almost forgotten it. But the reason I brought it up in the book was this level of, when you want to communicate with people, you have to have this sort of level of fearlessness. And I know we were talking about just previous to this was just talking about like, saying things that could get you canceled or getting you in trouble. But regardless of what you say, if you come in with this fearless ethos, that's how you can get things done in a conversation, because you're not so worried whether you're going to screw up or offend someone, because you just have to just drop all of the fear. Because once, talking about my Taylor Swift experience, once I got it in my own head, my whole daredevil man with no fear thing was gone. I was like, listen, now all of a sudden I'm like, I have to worry everything I'm saying. But if you have this mantra of like not being afraid to screw up, that will make conversations really open up, because you're not guarded. Because remember, that other person is probably gonna have some walls up. If you have walls up too, there's nothing going to happen. You got two sets of walls going on there. You can't get through two. That's impenetrable. One wall is hard enough. Two, impossible. So as long as you have your guard down, you'll be able to help bring that guard down.
And I think it's also intent, right? If you're going into a situation where you want the best, you're not trying to have a gotcha moment. You're not planning on asking some of the questions that's then going to go sideways so you can like get the soundbite that you want. If your intent is to get the best out of them, then you really should drop the fearlessness, because even if you mess up, even if it doesn't go exactly the way you want, I think people can tell where you're coming from. They know that it's from a good place. So even if it doesn't go perfectly, it won't ruin things. Whereas again, letting fear is such a motivator. Unfortunately, it keeps us from so many things. If we drop that fear and kind of go, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, really,
the fear piece is huge, Marcy. And I remember, it's funny, I just remember this story. A few years ago, Mark Wahlberg gave this interview in a magazine where he said that if he was on one of the planes in 9/11, he would have stopped the plane from crashing. As you can, just me saying
like a few people said stuff like that. Yeah, that's just.
And you're like, boy, that's really stupid. So the day that came out, we booked him for an interview, and it was a phone interview. So he calls up. It was the first interview he'd done after this thing went public. I mean, it was like everyone covered. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe Mark Wahlberg said this.
Did you just look at him and say, what were you thinking?
No, here's the thing. We were scared shitless. We didn't say anything. So we're having this conversation with Mark Wahlberg, and we're like, man, we don't want Mark Wahlberg to hang out with us, hang out in this conversation, have fun with us, because if we bring this up, it could go sideways. So the guys I was producing the show for, the two hosts, were like, we're not going there, but they were tiptoeing around it. And then finally Mark Wahlberg goes, well, you know what? I should probably address the elephant in the room and talk about what I said. And then went into the whole thing talking about where he was coming from. But instead of, 9 out of 10 times that celebrity will not volunteer to address the elephant in the room.
100%.
Mark Wahlberg did. And it just showed that we were coming from this place of fear of like, hey, if we bring this, so we're like pussyfooting around it. Like we're trying to talk about it without talking about it. And finally Wahlberg was like, yeah, man, let's just talk about this. Yeah. So this is what I said. This is what I meant to say. I'm sorry people were offended. Let's move on. But we were coming at it from a place of fear. We were like, we shouldn't be the ones to bring this up. We're going to be the first people to talk to Mark Wahlberg after he got sprayed across the globe with this story. We don't want to go there. And he went there. And then that moment ended up going viral. Like all TMZ picked it up and all these media outlets picked it up. but it wasn't because of us. We were too chicken shit. We didn't
Yeah, but
want
that's
to.
it's kind of understandable because that was such a huge, I mean, the risk, I would think, if you said did sound just a little bit wrong or uncaring or that could have been, I mean, people's, rightfully so, everyone's nerves were a little bit heightened and everybody's emotions were a little bit heightened. So obviously he came back from that. But
he came back from that and with a vengeance. But you know, that is a learning moment for all of us though, because I think, and this is something I do for when I do podcasts now, when I'm on the host side, before we start recording, I'm like, hey, listen, just so you know, I might have like a couple questions planned, but most of this is I'm going to take the conversation where you take it. And so if I have a follow-up question that you're not prepared to answer, just let me know. I'll move on. If you tell that people ahead of time, when it comes to anything, like, hey, listen, we're going to talk about this, but if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, just tell me, we'll move on. If you present that to folks, so they're not so on guard of like, oh my God, because you never know what anyone's going to ask you anytime. So as long as you can give some sort of preamble to be like, hey, listen, if this stuff comes up and you don't want to talk about it, that's cool. That's fine. I don't have any problem with it, but I just want you to know that. So I think that's kind of a good thing to keep in mind. Like if you want to go there, just give them a little heads up. Be like, hey, listen, sometimes something in this conversation may come up you're not prepared for. If that's the case, please let me know and then we'll move on.
See, it's so great the way that you do explain everything, because I think in this conversation, there have been so many just concrete tips and advice on what we should do and what we should avoid. But it's been in such a fun way with real life experiences. That's why I'm telling you, I read your book very quickly. And I think I emailed you and said, I'm reading it. I'm really enjoying it. And it's true. And I think that, so it's good listen. And I'm going to put it in the show notes so everyone gets the links to everything. Is there anything else that we missed that you want to get out before I let you go?
No, I mean, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's always funny. For years, I've always been on the other end of interviewing people. So now when people have me on their show or interview me for something, I'm always appreciative and honored by it, because I'm like, oh, cool. Somebody wants to talk to me. Usually I'm the one asking for people to talk to. So thank you very much for that. But I think, you know, my big mission with this book was, it wasn't about trying to name drop celebrities. It was just about, I realized that I learned a lot over my career that I think people who maybe they don't have to be in podcasting or be in entertainment, that people could learn from. I mean, the lessons I learned in my radio life helped me in my personal life. And so I've always been sort of like 100% a curious person. So when I meet people on the street, even if I'm meeting them for the first time, I always have a series of questions I always ask. My wife says I'm incredibly nosy. Like we'll be sitting on the pool by somebody and they'll tell me what they do for a living. And then I'll just pepper them with questions for the, next 45 minutes. And so, but that's just me. But I think if we can all just be a little more curious, we will all be better human beings. Just a little more curious as to what other people are going through. I think it would make the world a better place.
I agree. It's funny because when my kids were little, I used to say, when it comes to people, just know that you only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know about them. So to base your opinion on somebody on just what you're given, what you know, without getting to know them, you're doing both of you a disservice.
Yeah. And I quote David Foster Wallace in the piece. And if anyone's ever seen this speech he gave called This Is Water, and it's all about, we don't know what other people are going through, what's going through not only in just their life in general, but that day. So if you can just give people a little grace, like in his speech, he gives this story about like, most people, if they see someone in a giant truck, all they'll think is like, oh my God, that person's just destroying the environment. They don't care about gas and blah, 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 blah. But if you step back and think, well, maybe that person's driving that big truck because they possibly had a big accident when they were a kid and they feel more comfortable driving that truck. But again, if we're coming from the mindset of like just seeing something as it is without really looking at it from, lifting the hood and seeing what's underneath, we don't do that enough. Like we don't try to look to see, why is this person either say these things? Why is this person drive this certain vehicle? Why is this person acting a certain way? There's so many reasons why they're doing it. Sometimes it could be just because they like a big truck, but sometimes it could be because they feel safer. And do you want to take away someone's safety? I don't think we do. So
No, I do think we're more complicated. I think not everyone, like you said, some people are exactly what you think, but I think we are often layered and we have a lot of layers to us, but it is a lazy, it goes back to what you said at the beginning. It's just not caring about what other people are about. And it's so you see the first layer at the top layer, you're like, okay, I'm good, I'm done. And you don't have any interest to go any further. And that's where the good stuff is. I mean, I think that's the thing. And again, that's why I'm doing this, because I find that's the most interesting stuff. Like the layered stuff. Okay, we all say that, whatever.
Yeah.
But no, I want to get to like the under stuff, you know, the stuff that maybe doesn't come out until the 10th conversation or, you know, the 7th glass of wine. Who knows? But that's the really interesting stuff. So I'm going to thank you. Is there any, I just, okay. Before you go, I'm
thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
No, I loved it. I knew it was going to be a fun conversation. So one fun question I ask everyone is, and you know so many people, so to begin. So if they were going to make a movie of your life, who would play Joe?
All right. I'm going to say this because my wife hates this story. So one time we were driving like through I-95 from like Charleston to New York, and we go to a Starbucks drive-through, and we pull up into the glass window to pick up the coffees, and the guy goes, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm like, "Hey, I'm good. How you doing?" He goes, "Did anyone ever tell you look like Bradley Cooper?" And I'm like, "No, but thank you very much." So I just took the coffees, and my wife hates when I bring up that story now. But so yeah, I'll say Bradley Cooper. Why not?
Good choice. He's hot right now. All right, putting it out in the universe. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I might be too late because I think we're about the same age, so I'm gonna have to hurry up on that. I might have to get a younger person.
Get on. I don't know. He can do it all. He can do it all.
True.
So thank you so much again. And it's good listen. And I'm going to put all the info and all the links in my show notes. And good luck with everything. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And we'll pass it on for sure. So thank you
very much. God bless. Be safe out there.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Don't forget to subscribe to How to Ruin Your Own Reputation. Available now everywhere you get your podcasts.